Great, thank you. All right, looks like people are filtering in. We are going to get started just because we have a lot of content to cover and I want to get through as much as we can. So first of all, welcome. We're really excited to have you join us, whether it's live right now or watching on the video later. The reason we're doing this webinar is really for you. So so hopefully, if you're watching this webinar, that means you're interested in applying to neurology residency and you're interested in getting some advice about that. So I wanted to thank first off the American Academy of Neurology and our staff, so Ben Starter and Lucy Persaud, for helping put together this webinar, as well as helping sort of spearhead the whole process of putting together our consensus statement for virtual recruitment this year. So I chaired the virtual recruitment work group for the past few years. We did our best to put together sort of best practices and advice for programs and for applicants, and really get input from a lot of different constituents from the AAN, residents, fellows, faculty, chairs, program directors, fellowship directors, you name it. A lot of committees from the AAN all kind of put their opinions and thoughts into this statement, and we really tried to represent everybody the best we could on behalf of our applicants to really put together a fair and equitable process for applying to neurology residency. So that's really sort of what, sort of the background for this. And really what we want to do is answer your questions and make this process really feel accessible and get you excited about it. So that's really the goal of tonight. We're going to try to address a lot of you sent in awesome questions about just what you're curious about, what you want to know from us. So we are going to try our best to get through those the best we can. I'm going to jump straight into sort of big picture first. So as I call on our panelists, who are all awesome medical educators and neurologists, we're really excited to have them all here. I'm going to start off just kind of talking about big picture about applying to neurology residency. And so the first question I'm going to address to Dr. Patino, as he was most recently a resident, to talk a little bit about how do you go about choosing a program that might be right for you? What are some factors to consider? And what are the best ways to research a program?
Thanks, Dr. Schuyler. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming here. I'm very excited to see so many people interested in applying to neurology. I am a fourth-year neurology resident right now at UT Houston, so I'm not too far away from the application process. And I think that a couple of factors are very important for applying or to finding that program that it's the best fit for you. And of course, one of them is the localization of the program. So for example, in terms of where is the program, what's the weather, what's available in terms of art scene or things like that, because you're going to be there for 4 years or even more if you really like that program. So that's incredibly important for me. For example, here in Houston, we have all the symphony and everything that I was looking for. And I'm sure that all the other programs have that in their cities as well. So that's one of the reasons. The other one is the academic offers that they have in their program. So it's very important to do your research about these programs and see what kind of fellowships do they have there. If, for example, you have a special interest in neurology, because you can plan to stay there afterwards or get some of that training if you want to get different training in different programs. So we talked about localization, and the second one is what are the offers in terms of the fellowships that they have. Another thing that you could be interested in knowing is what kind of population the program where it's located do they serve. You might have some skills that are advantageous for taking care of these people. If you speak a different language and they have that community there, or you're interested in social determinants of health, that's something that could be of advantage for you. And also you can really help a lot of people by applying to that program. I could think of many things, but I think those are very important. And if you have any more questions about anything that you might be interested in, just let us know.
I think those are some great points to kind of think about what are your values, what's important to you in your training, the kind of populations you would want to serve, what subspecialties you may be interested in, what geographic area you might want to train in, what type of area, urban versus more suburban, what area of the country, things like that. So it's really great points. Next, just in general, what are some ways that you as applicants can demonstrate a strong interest in neurology? How can you make that show on your application? So Dr. Posas, do you want to address that?
Dr. Schuyler, thank you. Yeah, so that's a really important question. How do you prove that you care and are passionate about neurology? One way to show it is research. If you have research, fantastic. If it's in neurology, even better. If it's not in neurology, that's okay. Be prepared to talk about it and explain what part you contributed to. If you are into community service, if you're able to work for Habitat for Humanity or a homeless shelter or a women's shelter or something like that, talk about it. What we want to know is what you are passionate about. It is hard for us to teach passion. We can teach you how to do a brain tooth exam. We can teach you how to localize a lesion. We can't teach you to care for your patients. You have to bring that to us. And you have to show that to us by various different ways. If you organize the Ice Bucket Challenge for your medical school or your region, fantastic. If you organize or participate in the MS walk or the Epilepsy Foundation Purple Month activities, my gosh, that's fantastic. That doesn't have to be something you spearhead, but if you're part of it, it shows that you engage in your extracurricular hours.
Yeah, I think the key word used is, what are you passionate about? Because for all of you, that's going to be something different. And so there's not one activity that we think you should be doing in order to show us that you're interested in neurology. You should be doing what you're passionate about, right? And then tell us about it. And, and then we can, if we're seeing sort of a genuine interest and sort of your authentic, self, in terms of what you're excited about, what you would bring to a program, what you would add in terms of community outreach, just ways that you would add to the community of where you're training. That's something that I think programs really, really want to learn about you. So I know all of you probably have different interests and inclinations, and, it's kind of great to see sort of what makes you an individual, and to try to bring that out on your application. Specifically, I'm just going to address, so is it necessary to do an away rotation? So that's a good point, good time to point out our consensus statement. So that's one of the things that we do address in there. And I just wanted to bring light to it, just because we do get a lot of questions sent to us about that. So it's not required to do an away rotation or an audition rotation in neurology. For a lot of programs, they do take visiting rotators. Oftentimes it's from programs with a preference that do not have their own clerkship as part of their medical school. So not all medical schools have a neurology clerkship. And I think most programs that do take away rotators will give preference to students that do not have that opportunity. But it's not looked at as a requirement, or that you need to audition at a certain program in order to be considered to get a residency spot there. So I'm going to move on next, just in terms of staying sort of on the general level, and then we'll get into some more specifics about the application. So, Dr. Matthews, what are in general some of the things that program directors and selection committees looking for? So I want to ask you, and I'm also going to ask Dr. Torrens about that, because we have a couple sort of long-term program directors here that have done this for many years. So just in terms, so Dr. Matthews first, and then Dr. Torrens, if you can just talk to us just sort of your general approach when you review an application, just sort of what are you looking for? What are you looking at? How do you do it, just to kind of get rid of some of the mystery about that?
Sure. Again, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. This is such an exciting time of year, and it's great to see so many people here interested in neurology and excited about applying. As Dr. Schuyler said, I'm the program director at Emory. I've been PD for 8 years. And this is a great question, and it was sort of alluded to a little bit a few minutes ago. For me, I think every PD is different. For one thing, every program is looking for something different. Some programs prioritize, research, or, a community program might prioritize people that are interested in serving the people of that community. And so I can't really speak to all PDs, but for myself, I really like to see people with a passion. And this was sort of discussed a few minutes ago, and it doesn't need to be research. It doesn't need to be community service. It needs to be something, we like to see people that have something to bring to our program. That might be an interest in ethics, or an interest in teaching, or an interest in business, people that are interested in healthcare management, or we have a lot of residency tracks at Emory. We have one resident that just got into our medical innovation track. She's really interested in devices. And so it's just really great to have a diverse community of individuals with diverse interests. And also, I have to say, some people don't know what their passion is yet, and that's okay as well. If you're not really sure exactly what you want to do, it's okay, as long as you are open-minded and have tried different things. And I think an application that shows that, and it shows that you are invested in your community, and you, have something that you're interested in that makes you stand out. And personally, I know people are going to answer a lot or talk a lot about specifics, what we look for in applications when it comes to scores and things like that. So I'm not going to get too much into that, though I am going to talk a little bit about letters of recommendation specifically. But I think overall, on the application, you really want to kind of show who you are as a person and don't leave things out. If you think it's insignificant that you worked as a camp counselor, when you were in med school or when you were in college for children with disabilities, and you're like, oh, well, that was like 5 years ago. It doesn't matter. No, it does. Definitely share those things that you did. All of those things that you did are significant, even if to you, it doesn't seem like it was significant. So Dr. Schuyler, do you want me to mention my thoughts about letters of recommendation?
Sure. Yeah, let's do that now.
Okay, so we're going to talk about specifics about the application. And so letters of recommendation, someone also asked about this in the chat box. I'm sorry, personal statement, not letters. Personal statement. So I feel pretty strongly about personal statement, and maybe that's because I love to write. And so reading, and I'm not saying I'm sitting there judging people's writing skills, but this is also really the only little piece of you that we get to read, other than, the application describing what you're doing. That's different than this is in your voice. And so I really feel like I learn a lot from people by reading their personal statement. And this is your chance to tell us who you are. And so I think it's important to tell us, why you're interested in neurology, but I feel pretty strongly about not using that time to talk about a patient. And I know other people don't mind this, but it really, I feel like, we see patients all the time. We talk about patients all the time. I want to know about you. I want to know who you are. I want to know what your passions are. I want to know where you've been and why you're at this place you're at now. And so tell me something about you. And don't tell me about a patient. I don't want to read about someone with a stroke or someone with seizures. I do that all day. I don't really want to read about that in your personal statement. The others can chime in if they feel differently, but I love reading personal statements. And so, but I don't want to put too much emphasis on that. I know some people aren't writers, and so they worry a lot about it. A personal statement isn't going to break you. If you write a personal statement about a patient or it's pretty bland or boring, it's not going to break you. But I do think a personal statement could make you. So if you're someone that's on the bubble and you're kind of average, but your personal statement is amazing, that will make me want to meet you, because I'll say, wow, that person is really interesting, and listen, their voice is just so fascinating. I really want to meet them and talk to them. So that could really help you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it happens to me too. I think, sometimes, in reading all these applications, especially if, this will be year 16 for me as a program director, but probably close to 20 years of reading applications. So, I've read a lot of essays, and, there are usually it's only a handful of them every year that I read it and I'm like really touched, or, there've been some that, make me cry, or, just something about, the experience that the person shares in their personal statement, just like you said, really makes me want to meet that person and talk to them and get to know them, and kind of ask them more about themselves. And so I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of, how a personal statement, it's not necessarily going to hurt your application if it's not a standout essay, but if it is, then that could really kind of help in terms of having your application, really considered for an interview. Dr. Torrens, I want to get to you as well in terms of sort of big picture. How do you approach an application, and kind of, what are programs looking for when they read applications?
So thank you everyone for being here. I'm Letty Torrens. I was the program director for 10 years. I'm now the associate director. I was the associate director before that. Jose Posas was one of my residents. And again, just like everyone mentioned, we read so many personal statements and we look at so many applications. I too love reading the personal statement, and I agree. It's only sometimes, like when reading so many, like you kind of get lost. It's like a lot of, Alzheimer patients, stroke patients. But I think, when you're writing it, I feel like a lot of times you use that because it's like your personal connection, or maybe something that really moved you. So I understand What I do want to, like, one thing I do want to mention, you know, when I look at the application, I usually will quickly read the personal statement, and then I go to letters of recommendation, and then I screen like your CV. So I wanted to see like what has the student been interested in, and I like to look for diversity. Like in the application individual, and then also when I'm looking to like sort of globally, like who I'm inviting. Our program is very large, right? So I want residents that have research experience, but I don't want them all to have research experience. I want some that are into service, into community engagement. I want some that are into education. So for me, I'm looking for, you know, diversity in the individual as well as in the group, because I'm thinking about the class that I'm recruiting and I want them to be a diverse group. We don't really use cutoffs, so we're not looking at a score to cut off. We don't typically look at cutoffs for a year of graduation, although if there is a longer gap than 5, we want to see what has been done in those years. You know, we have students that have, or residents that have been out 9-10 years, and, you know, we want to see, has there been any clinical experience in that time? So that's something we look at. I do want to mention, because I do work with a lot of international graduates, if you are writing a personal statement and English is not your first language, definitely get someone that has that as your first language to take a look, because you don't want to, you know, submit a personal statement that has like a silly grammatical error or something that could have been fixed. So that's something that I do recommend when I meet with my students, you know, as giving them advice to make sure that they have somebody. It wouldn't be me, it would be somebody else who was more experienced with grammar to review it for them. So those are a couple of things. And then the letter of recommendation, the other thing that I'm also, you know, those are really important. Somebody in the chat asked about, do you need a neurology letter? It's always good to have one, but we do recognize not everyone is going to have a neurology letter. So that's okay if you don't. If you do have one, that is helpful. And then the other thing is, you want to ask your letter writer, are you going to write me a strong letter? You want to make sure that you get enough affirmation from that, because you want to make sure that the person that's writing that letter, you know, has experience writing the letter, hopefully in other letters of recommendation, and also will affirm that they will write you a strong letter.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. So great advice so far. Just, you know, and that's the thing. So, you know, there are over 170 adult neurology programs. And if you ask each of the program directors from those programs, they are all going to tell you slightly different things in terms of how they approach the application. How do they, you know, what are sort of, you know, their priorities in terms of selecting, because you know, all the programs have sort of a different slant. Some programs may be more research focused, some may be more community based, some may be more, you know, focused on certain subspecialties that those departments have like a strength in. You know, so all of the, you know, the programs are all going to be a little bit different. And you know, the people reviewing your applications aren't going to be the same at all the different programs. And with a holistic review process, meaning, you know, programs should be reviewing your application in its entirety and kind of looking at all the components of it. The programs are going to vary a bit in terms of how they weight those different components and what do they sort of value, and how do they try to recruit a diverse class with lots of interests and things like that. Everybody has slightly different ways of doing that. So I think it's kind of important to consider that. And also that, you know, you are looking for a program that is not necessarily the one with the biggest name. You are looking for the program that is the best fit for you. Where do you feel like you are going to be sort of happy and at home training, and also have the opportunities that you're looking for based on what your own potential career interests are. So, I mean, I think, you know, that gets back to researching programs and kind of seeing, you know, what may be a good fit for you. And that's really what programs are looking for also, is they're looking for a class of residents that's really going to meet the needs of their patient community, as well as, you know, have a diverse group of learners that are really going to make for sort of a you know, strong program with people with a variety of different interests. So I think, you know, there's not one magic answer you're going to get. You're going to get a different answer if you ask any different program sort of what they're looking for specifically. So I'm going to move on a little bit to some of the, you know, nitty gritty of the application still. We just talked a little bit about letters of recommendation in terms of who to ask. You know, I think, like Dr. Torn said, it's important to get, if you can, have at least one letter from neurology, but really it's important to have a strong letter that speaks to who you are as a physician, that, you know, is really going to be able to, someone who knows you well, that's going to be able to really provide really strong and, detailed information about your clinical performance and kind of your potential in your future training and career. So I think it's important, and that may not be a neurologist that knows you the best. If it's somebody from a different rotation, if it's someone from general surgery or OB or dermatology, or, someone that you really connected with, or, some of your mentors from medical school that may have been outside of neurology, then definitely still ask them for letters. I think it's really important to get the best quality letter that you can over having them all be from neurology. So I want to, so I'm going to direct the next question to Dr. Patino in terms of, we have a lot of international medical graduates that are applying for neurology positions. And so I'd like to get some of your perspective as well, just in terms of what are some of the things that IMGs can do to prepare a competitive application.
Yeah, so the application has different components. Like, of course, one of them is your clinical experience and where you trained. The second one is research experience. There's also a part that you can put all the volunteer experiences that you've had that are very meaningful and that have shaped your career in many ways. So as long as you participate and you put the information in the application system about all those experiences, that makes your application very competitive to start with. In terms of letters of recommendation, I know that for IMG sometimes it's difficult and in the era of the pandemic and everything, sometimes for financial situations or whatever it is, you might not be able to come to the US to do like an observership or shadow, and you all become a little bit concerned about not having clinical experience in the US. There are many other ways that you can be seen and still have a very competitive application here. Now in the era of technology and virtual collaboration, you can still collaborate with centers in the US by doing research or writing reviews, things like that. So I would highly encourage you to do that if for some reason you're not able to come. If you have the resources and time to come, I would still recommend that you come and see how the system works in the United States, because it might be different from our countries. So for you to really be convinced this is what I want to do and I can adapt to it very quickly. So those will be my recommendations. Work on your research and do this, try to network with people. That's also very important. If you're able to come to the AAN meetings or any neurology meetings, regional or international, do that, because you get to meet people there who will really give you more advice about how to apply and make your application more competitive.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice, especially about the mentoring and the networking. I think that's something that's so important in terms of applying for residency as an IMG, is to have, especially if there are, maybe previous graduates from your medical school that have matched in the US, if you have friends, or if you, in terms of if you get a research experience talking to people that have matched already. I know that there are ways to find mentors. I know online with NMatch, they have a mentorship program. I know a lot of our faculty and residents who are IMGs have mentored future applicants in terms of preparing their applications. The AAN meeting, there's definitely a lot of networking going on there, as well as, a lot of sort of online events and things like that. So I think that is really important. And programs, I think, are, if it's possible to have US clinical experience, I think that is really important. If you have some US clinical experience, to get to know what the healthcare system is like in the US, and having a US letter, I do think that can help. A lot of people have various research experiences where they're able to do some clinical observerships, either at the institution where they're doing research, and sort of the more information that they can provide, the better. There was a question, I think, in the QA asking about residency outside of the US. So absolutely, if you have experience with neurology residency training or internal medicine residency training outside of the US, that's definitely, those are clinical skills that are definitely applicable coming into US neurology residency positions. And, I think it's important to highlight kind of what your clinical training is, especially if you've had additional training past medical school in your home country, that it's really important to kind of describe that and talk about your clinical experience. And that does factor in to, when people look at, how long has it been since you've been out of training? It's not just that we're not looking necessarily just at med school graduation date. If you've done residency, or you've been doing residency or a fellowship or different, if you've been doing clinical work in the time since you've graduated from medical school, then that's something that would be a positive. So, I think those are some things to consider as well. I'd like to get back a little bit to some more of the sort of the details of the application. So I know we talked a little bit about letters of recommendation, about personal statement and research. I would also like to talk a little bit about test scores. So Dr. Posas, if you'd like to talk a little about USMLE, COMLEX, and then kind of how should you address it if you need to repeat one of those?
Yes, so I'm going to start with brutal honesty, right? We have filters, and some programs use the filters. And some of the programs say that if you do not have a step or if you're a DO, you're going to get the axe. So that being said, if you do really well in your complex, the programs that do look at DOs will probably bother to, I mean, there's free available online tools to calculate what percentage the COMLEX score is. So what we had sort of talked about in the green room before this is it fair or equitable for us as program directors to ask you to take 2 sets of standardized tests to prove your worth to us? I don't think it is personally, right? And I know that my colleagues agree with me, but just know that there are some programs that if you don't have a step 2, they're not going to look at you, and the step 2 better be strong. That being said, it scores in general. This data is freely available on the NRMP. It's a wealth of knowledge. You can look at it yourself. Last year's matching class, the mean scores for US medical grads was somewhere between the high 230s and low 240s, right? So if you can score a 250 or 260, congratulations, fantastic. Hold your head high, be confident, make sure that you show who you really are to programs to try to figure out what a good fit is for you. If you're below that, that's okay. That's not the kiss of death, but at the same time, it really then behooves you to make sure you're thinking strategically about who you ask for your letter of recommendation. If it's the neurologist you spent one day with, that's probably not going to be a strong letter. As was said by my colleagues before, if you have a general surgeon that you've known for 5 years, if you have a family medicine doctor that's known you since childhood and you've done home rotations with them during your holiday breaks and stuff like that, pick those people who know you and who can advocate for you. Other than that, I would say if you do fail a step, very important to talk about it. You can try to use your letter of recommendation to address it. I would have an open and honest conversation with your letter writer and explain to them what you have done and what you have learned if you have failed a step, and use that as sort of a rising action and say, I may have failed a step, but I learned that I overtaxed myself. My family was sick. There was turmoil in my household, et cetera, et cetera. I've grown as a person. We want to hear stories of growth and how you can overcome and be resilient. You know, if you write, hey, I failed a step and then I sat at home and ate Haagen-Dazs and watched Netflix, that's fine, but do we need to hear that? Not necessarily, right? I mean, it's fine to have your moment. That all being said, having your letter writers addressing in your personal statement, but making sure you show what you've learned from it can be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Matthews, can you also kind of weigh in just in terms of if somebody has a challenge that they've had, so for example, what Dr. Post has talked about, if you've had to retake an exam, but also if you've had to repeat a course, if you've had to retake a shelf exam, anything that, might stand out as a challenge or something that needs to be addressed, how should you approach that on the actual application itself? And what should you be prepared to do kind of going into an interview in terms of addressing it?
Yes. First, I just want to echo the fact that we are all human. We all have bad days, and we're understanding of that as PDs. And honestly, I feel like all of us do have failures at some point, and having one early, learning from it and moving on is a good thing, because then if you are having a struggle and you learn to ask for help, or, you're having an issue and you worked through it, it's good to do that early, because then hopefully next time you'll be able to ask for help, or you'll have understood what happened. So all of us understand that. And I just want to say some of my best residents ever were residents that did fail a step exam. They went on to be chiefs. They went on to be faculty. So, we don't look at that as an absolute. I mean, I can't speak to all PDs, but personally, I don't look at that as a reason to not give someone a chance. But I do think it's important to address it and to not just pretend it didn't happen. So when I see that someone failed a board exam or a shelf exam or something, I want to see, I like it when they've written about it in their personal, I like when they wrote about it in their personal statement and they explain what happened and how, maybe it was a growing experience or whatever. At least address it. Don't just pretend like it's not there, because it is there, and we notice and we wonder what happened. So for me, it's more of a red flag if it's not addressed in the application. I'm not sure about the other PDs, but I mean, not everyone wants to write about it, so I'm not going to hold that against you, but we will ask you about it when you come interview. So definitely be prepared to talk about it. And I don't want to put people on the spot or make them feel uncomfortable. Of course, we don't want to do that, but just like gently asking, what happened. So just be ready to explain exactly why, that happened and how you've learned from it and how you're going to avoid that happening in the future. I think that's really important to do.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the next topic. I think it's important to talk to. So I think being prepared to talk about challenges when you do have an interview, it typically will be the program director that will bring up those issues as opposed to potentially the other interviewers. That'll probably be a topic that the PD will talk to you about and try to, and be curious about and try to understand kind of what went on and kind of what you learned, how you grew from that experience, what kind of and to kind of delve into your insight about whatever issue that was. So let's talk a little bit now, I guess, about interviewing. So I think that's something that hopefully you'll get some practice and we'll talk about best practices a little bit, but let's talk about first sort of what are some of the things that you might get asked about in the interview, because I think that's something that people are curious about. And I'll give one piece of advice about that is make sure anything that you list in your application, especially if it's listed as one of your meaningful experiences or something that you put in your personal statement, be prepared for that to be a topic of conversation, because that is what the interviewers that are looking at your application or looking at portions of your application that may be shared with them before they interview you are most likely going to include your activities and your personal statement and your letters of recommendation. So topics of conversation, just be prepared to, talk about anything that's in your CV. If there's a research project, be prepared for somebody to just pick something off of your CV and be like, oh, you worked on this, tell me about it, and just be really prepared to talk about anything that you listed. And then what are some other things that you might face, or, what are some ways that you can prepare to have a strong interview? So let's go to so Dr. Torrens, you want to talk about that a little bit? I know you've done probably a lot of interviewing over the years you were a PD.
100 times, many years, so like about 100 per year. So I usually like to start, tell me a little bit about yourself and what brought you to neurology. Then I'll usually would have already pre-selected a couple questions that I have when I reviewed your application, perhaps about your research or a service project that you encountered. And again, and I think red flags would be if I ask you about tell me about the molecular signaling research you did on Alzheimer's, et cetera, and the applicant may really have not known too many details about it. So that could be seen as a red flag. So I do, as Dr. Schuyler mentioned, like that is definitely something that you want to make sure that you did do the work that was, on the CV. And then I usually will ask them, like, what do you think is like what are you most proud of, or what is the biggest accomplishment that you've had, just to see, what they're proud of. And usually we'll talk about, if there's an interesting hobby, I'll mention that just to break the ice. And then at the end, I'll usually ask them, why did you just decide to apply to Miami? What are the reasons why you decided to apply to our program? And there, you can also see what the interest of the candidate is. So if you're going to a program, you should, review their website. A lot of the programs now have either Twitter or Instagram pages that are done by the residents, so you could look at different activities there as well. So I think it's important to sort of research the program and then be prepared to have some questions. I know that sometimes you have a lot of interviews throughout the day, so you might be, if I'm the last interviewer, I sort of give you a break. But if I'm the first interview and I ask you, do you have any questions about the program? And the applicant says no, to me, that's also a red flag because it doesn't show interest. So I think the main thing that you're going to try to convey is, number one, that you're passionate about becoming a neurologist. And number two, that you're really interested in coming to that program. And I think it's even more important now that we're virtual, right? Before, I knew you were interested in coming to my program. You bought a flight, you booked a ticket, you have a hotel, and it's a big effort. Now it's a little bit less of an effort to say yes to an interview and log on to Zoom. So I think it takes a little bit extra to show that you're interested in the program. So that's my advice.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Patino, what's some advice that you have just in terms of either preparing for an interview or kind of how should you do your setup, or what are some tips that you have for applicants who are getting ready to do their interviews?
Yeah, so following what Dr. Torres said, like it's very important for you to know your own CV, but I would also recommend that because programs probably will send you in advance who will you interview with, read a little bit about them. So what are they doing research on? What's their experience what's their clinical experience or clinical focus in neurology? Because that can give you also information to ask them questions about their practice and also to make the conversation flow a little bit better. In terms of the setup, just have a nice background, I would say. If you want to put something about neurology, that's great. If you want to put a couple of plants, that's fine. Nothing that really stands out too much that is going to be distracting for the interviewers. And just have a very good lighting, and also make sure that you have a very good internet connection. I know that sometimes if you feel your internet's going to fail, medical schools might offer to some of the students a space where they can go and take the interview there, and maybe the connection might be more stable. And also make sure that the place is very quiet so you can communicate clearly to others and they can understand what you're saying.
Yeah, that's great. I think that being said, though, and we outlined some of this in the consensus statement as well, just in terms of advice for applicants about doing your interviews, is that, technical problems happen, Zooms get disconnected, we lose our Wi-Fi, that is not going to speak to your character if something like that happens. So we are used to, we've been on Zoom for, 4 years now. I think we're used to kind of interacting in this environment. And, we have a backup, we have a phone number, we can log back in, if you get disconnected and need to come back, or like you hit leave the meeting and you leave the whole thing and come back or whatever, we're not going to worry about that. Same thing in terms of exactly where you're looking. So, I think it's important more to just kind of practice a little bit doing interviews, making sure that you have answers to the common questions that you're going to be asked, to really kind of think about those answers and maybe practice a few times with a friend or a colleague, log on to a Zoom meeting and do some practicing. I think that would really help. Number one, make sure that you have kind of your thoughts together in a way that you're going to articulate your interest and your passion well to your interviewers. And it will also make you feel more comfortable. So maybe make you less nervous in terms of logging in and meeting with somebody online in sort of an interview format, as opposed to, a webinar or something or a class or something like that, where you might be logging into Zoom that way. So, and just making, minimizing distractions, I think are all kind of important to do, but I wouldn't worry about a huge expensive setup or expensive lighting or anything like that. We understand, everybody has a different living situation. You might be in a different time zone. You might have to be, from your bedroom. Just, I think, my advice is, I think it's a little less distracting just if you can put, a plain wall behind you. If you're in a sort of confined space to do your interviews, I think it's better to have a plain background than something that might be potentially distracting to an interviewer, because we really just want to talk to you and get to know you. So I wouldn't worry too much about having, extra kind of stuff behind you if possible. So I think, but yeah, practicing I think is really important for this. So I want to next talk a little bit about some of the specifics this year about neurology application. And one of those things is the program signal. So I'm going to ask Dr. Matthews to talk a little bit about program signals. If you want to just kind of briefly, we have 20 minutes left. So if you want to just kind of briefly highlight the process, there were some questions about why is it 8 and how did we decide that? And what does that mean that there are 8 signals? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So as you all know, we went from 3 signals, which we had for the past 2 years, up to 8 this year. And this was voted on and decided by all the program directors in the AAN consortium of program directors. And, there was a lot of lively debate and discussion about how many signals to have. And we really wanted to have a lot more signals. And the reason is because as program directors, we've been inundated with applications because you all can apply to a lot of programs. And for us, it's really difficult to know who's really interested. So that's why we have the signals period. But 3 wasn't enough, because we really wanted to kind of replicate which programs would you interview at in person if you were back in the day, like when Dr. Schuyler and I and Dr. Tornes, like when all of us oldsters were applying, we actually had to get on a plane, fly to programs, spend money, spend time, miss rotations. You had to be really serious to do those things. It wasn't just hop on Zoom and talk to people. It was a big deal. And so, now we don't know when we get 1,000 applications, which of these people are serious about us and which aren't. So we wanted to use the signals as sort of a replicator of that. Like, which 8 programs would you interview at in person? And so that's why we went up to that number. Some of us wanted more because you really do need to interview at more than 8. And so we're not sure how it's going to be next year. Next year, it might be more signals, but that was sort of the rationale for that, to give us more of an idea of who would be interested enough to come in person. So we'll see how it works. I mean, obviously we don't have data yet to show us if this is, are the people that signal us going to be the ones that match with us? We're not really sure about that. But for your signals, obviously you're going to signal your top 8 programs, and every program, if you do have a home institution, if you're a US grad, every home institution kind of has their own criteria, their own rules about that. I mean, we tell our students not to signal us. We don't want them to waste a signal on us. We automatically interview them. Same with the students who come here and do a rotation with us. We say, don't waste a signal on us. We're going to interview you. So, but you need to ask your home programs about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great explanation. Yeah, I think if you kind of put yourself in the shoes of a program, for example, we have, 7 spots and we got 1,200 applications. So like, how do we even approach that? Sometimes we hear about people applying to 40, 60 programs, whereas at least for US MD grads, they only need to rank, like, I think between 8 and 9 to hit nearly 100% match rate. And we go into a lot of detail. We had several of our colleagues on our work group really go through the numbers for the NRMP by applicant type and kind of try to break that down for you. And that's included as an appendix in the consensus statement. So I encourage you to look at that. I also encourage all of you as applicants to look at the ARAS data, the NRMP data, review it yourself. It really, gives you a lot of information about how many, to try to figure out how many programs might be important to apply to, interview at, but we do make specific recommendations about that in the consensus statement. So even though all of you have your unique circumstances in terms of where you're coming from as an applicant, I think it's important to know big picture what the statistics are in terms of match rate for our specialty. So that being said, I think that's one of the reasons why it's important for programs to have those signals, because somebody can demonstrate a genuine interest. Otherwise, it's very diluted. If we get 1,200 applications, we have no idea which applicants, that we're sort of in your top 10. And so if we have potentially 800 people out of 1,200 that would meet our interview criteria, I'm just sort of pulling that number out of thin air, but let's say 800 were qualified for an interview out of 1,200. How do I know which applicants are the ones that are actually really genuinely interested in coming to Connecticut? So that's really sort of what the signals are getting at. Also for the geographic preference, the same thing. So if, they're kind of divided up into big regions of the country. So if you do have a geographic preference, then then that helps, because then you can state, you really do want to be in New England, or you want to be in the Mid-Atlantic, or it's pretty big regions of the country actually for some of them. But, stating that preference is important to programs. If a program sees that, this applicant wants to live in my part of the country, then that is potentially going to be helpful for your application to that program. Conversely, if you really do not have any geographic preference, you are willing to move anywhere, then you can also state that as well, that, you would be willing to come regardless of where in the US the program is located. And there's a way to designate that in your application as well. So I think this also gets at researching programs, because this means that you really need to do some upfront research as applicants in terms of really making a selection of what your top 8 programs are, rather than casting a huge net before you really research programs significantly. So it kind of changes a little bit in terms of the degree that you need to kind of upfront research the programs to really decide what might be the best fit for you, so you can really narrow it down to those top 8 in signaling. So this is very different than how the applications have been in previous years. So we don't really know how it's going to work yet with 8, but I think that's really the key from the applicant perspective, is really to do your research about programs beforehand to really make, you know, as educated of a decision as you can in terms of those 8 programs that you're going to signal for consideration. So anybody else from the group want to talk about kind of their take on the signals or the geographic preference, kind of how those will be kind of factored into application review?
I think somebody in the chat, I've been trying to answer a bunch of questions, but somebody asked, like, how are we going to give interviews to people that don't signal us? Absolutely. We have again 1,200 applications. You know, the signals could be, it's very variable, and just because you signaled us doesn't mean I'm going to give you an interview. And 1,000%, if you didn't signal, you might get an interview, because it's just so many candidates. But we look at the applications the same. I think if you have 2 people that are about the same on paper, and one person signaled me and the other one didn't, I'm going to give the interview to the person that signaled me, because they likely, you know, want to come to our program. That's how I would use that. And I think the other question about the geographic, they asked, and I was trying to answer, but I think I clicked the wrong thing. It's okay if you don't have a geographical preference. I think you mentioned that. You can leave it blank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So I think how programs are going to use the signals is going to vary by program. Just like in all the other components of the application, we might have a program. So let's say there's some program and they're super popular. Like everybody wants to go there. It's like everybody's #1 choice program, like this awesome program. And they get, you know, applications from every single neurology applicant in the country, let's say, applies to them. They might have way more signals than another program does. So let's say a program gets 800 signals and you know 2,000 applications. It might be that program may only consider the 800 people that signaled them. You know what I mean? As opposed to there might be another program that may not be, you know, might be off people's radar a little bit, like a good program that just might not, you know, receive as many signals for whatever reason, that they might have more of the percentage of the people they're inviting for interviews be ones that they haven't gotten signals from. So I think there is going to be some variation just in, you know, maybe how programs are reviewing the signals and how much that is going to weight into the application. But I think, you know, I would think that probably some programs are, you know, it is going to be a big advantage to have a signal versus not. But, you know, I think we'll end up having more of that data once this cycle goes through and we can get some more information about that. So, yeah, so just in terms of the questions, I looked quickly at the Q&A, and thank you for typing answers, and thank you for all of your great questions. So I think we're, you know, while this is going on and people are talking, we're getting a lot of questions asked and answered in the Q&A section. I think that's great. One of the things, just in terms of a theme of some of the questions end up being about, you know, I have this part of the application that I'm worried about. How much is this going to how much is X, Y, or Z going to negatively affect my application? So just to kind of take a step back from that, your application is going to be your application. So regardless if you've gotten a pass on this one clerkship or a high pass on this other clerkship, or you know, your step 2 was 10 points lower than you were hoping it would be, that's kind of what your score is. That's what your grade was. I think rather than kind of approach it as trying to figure out how might that hurt you, I think the main thing to think about in putting together your application is how can you demonstrate to programs like everything that's great about your application. And what are things that are your strengths? And, you know, really, how do you highlight the positive portions of your application? How do you show your genuine interest? How do you show your excitement about neurology? All of that stuff, that's what's most important. So I think if somebody's looking at your application as a whole, then, you know, a pass in X, Y, or Z course, or, you know, a specific numeric score, like a 240 versus a 235, like those minor details are not going to matter so much compared to kind of what your letters are saying about your clinical skills and how sort of nice or kind of a person you are, and, you know, how much you're involved in, you know, your service activities or doing good for other people. And, you know, those kinds of things are, you know, more important than 5 points on, you know, on your USMLE. So I think really kind of thinking about what's important to you, how do you want to highlight your strengths? Those are the things that I think are the most important to think of on your application. So I would try, and I know it's hard because this is sort of, you know, you get nervous about this. This is a big, you know, it's a big decision in your life in terms of where you're going to train for residency, and you want to try to get into the best program you can. But I think from the program standpoint, we are not really that caught up on, you know, maybe a few points here and there, or your score on one specific course or one specific shelf exam, things like that. We're kind of thinking of how are you going to be training in our program, going from being, you know, a med school new med school graduate or an international physician that's coming to train in the US, going from that point A to point B of being, you know, a neurologist graduating from our training program, and kind of what are you going to do with that? What's your career going to be? You're going to be a colleague now, you know, you're going to be a neurologist that's sort of, you know, one of our colleagues across the country. And, you know, we want to, you know, pick people that are going to be excited about, and we feel like have great potential in our specialty. So I think, you know, those little details don't matter as much as sort of, you know, sort of what are sort of the major, you know, points you want to make in your application. I didn't explain that very well, but I just wanted to kind of maybe put your mind at ease if you have a little aspect of your application that you're kind of, you know, worried or more self-conscious about. So on that note, we have just a few minutes left. So I'm going to go around to our panelists and just kind of get some closing thoughts about, you know, what's something you may not have mentioned, or what's one piece of advice you want to give to the applicants maybe that you haven't had a chance to share yet. So I'm just going to go around my circle. So Dr. Posas, if you could start off with that and give us some advice.
I'm gonna give you an old fogey bit of advice and a bit of a story, and I know that's bad in the short time, but out of all the places I flew to, paid for a hotel room, and then paid for a rental car or cabs or taxis, the worst hotel I stayed in was in Miami. It looked like a hotel out of the movie Scarface, like the bad hotel. If you've watched Scarface, then you know what I'm talking about. I still chose it as number one. That's where I ended up. And it's because of the strength of the program, the people. Dr. Tornes was amazing. The residents there were amazing. It's the connections that you make. So long story short, whatever you research online, can get in paper, can read on student.net, all the other places, social media, etc. At some point, you really have to turn inward and reflect, especially in the weeks and months leading up to your rank list. Where do I see myself learning the skills that I need to fully develop and grow as a neurologist and take care of patients and be happy in my job for the rest of my life? Neurology used to be number 2 in terms of burnout. We're now number 6, which is great. We're out of the top 5. But we want to ensure that your wellness is still part of what happens when you are done with your residency. And part of that is picking a program that you know you can connect with the people there and feel supported, so that it is an effective learning environment, but it gives you the skills to grow on and have a strong practice and be fulfilled later in life.
Great. Thanks for that advice. Dr. Patino, I'm going like in clockwise order here.
Yeah, just adding a little bit more of that, like that I've realized in residency, the neurology community here is incredible, and everyone is so close to each other, ready to support you in many ways that they're able to. So don't be afraid to reach out to other residents in programs, or even sometimes to some of the faculty, and ask them questions if you feel that something has not been fully explained. And just best of luck for matching in the best program that fits you and for pursuing neurology, which is a great specialty.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Patino. Dr. Matthews.
So the advice I want to give is you all are going to be going on a lot of these interviews, and all the programs will sort of blend together, hearing about their rotations and their, you know, all the different things that you're going to do there. And what I would really recommend doing is just listen to your gut. And even if it's a program, so when I was applying, I ended up interviewing at Rush. I interviewed a bunch of programs, and I interviewed at Rush in Chicago. It was a program I didn't really know a lot about, But when I went there, I just got a really good feeling, and I couldn't even explain it, but it was like this gut feeling that I just belonged there, and I loved the people. I loved the way I felt there. It just was such a great environment. And even though I didn't know, it wasn't a big name program. I applied at some other places that were bigger names, and I was like, maybe I should try to go there because this place has a bigger name value. And so I really agonized with myself over that. But I'm really happy that I went where I went because I had a great experience there. And so I want to tell you to really trust your instincts and really pay attention to how you feel. And we know that it works. This Zoom interview process, it works. We're able to tell a lot about you when you interview with us, and you're able to tell a lot about us. You can tell about the dynamics between the residents when you're at the happy hour. You can tell how the residents are interacting with the faculty. And so, pay attention to those things and see how you feel around those people and listen to your own instincts and just trust them.
Thank you. Dr. Torrance, what are some of your advice?
I think exactly what everyone said. And I also just think, when you go to the interview, just try to be yourself, be honest in the application, honest in your communication. And the same thing, you want the reputation, you want, the rotations, etc., but you also want to be comfortable in the environment that you're in. So I think it's really important when you're at that, usually you'll have the pre-interview social or Zoom meeting with the residents, trying to see how you fit in and how you feel with that community. I think that's also very important because you're going to spend a lot of time with these folks for the next 4 years. Another advice that I have is, depending on, when you're researching the programs, a really good resource could be the clerkship or program director at your home institution. They usually have a lot of contacts. And if, you want to go to a certain state or a certain place, maybe your program director knows that other program director, and they can sort of put you in contact or help you with the rank list. We usually try to meet with all of our students to help them when they're looking at different schools. They may not want to stay in our program. They want to go somewhere else. We want the best for our students. So I think that's another good resource, at your home institution. Or if you're, not from, you're not in school currently, reaching out to the AAN. Twitter has also different programs, and their students have created different Twitter sites to help all the students. All the open houses are coming now too. So if you be on the lookout for those on social media, different programs will showcase their program. If there's something that you want to look into, you can see and log into their webinars.
Yeah, that's great advice as well. So I know everybody's programs are trying to keep their websites up to date. A lot of us, we have open houses and different webinars every year, so you can probably find them. These AAN webinars are on YouTube. A lot of residency programs, you can probably find their previous webinars on YouTube as well, and then try to attend the current one for the upcoming year. Just as last minute advice, it's just about the end of the hour. So thank you all again for answering, I think, like almost 100 questions in the Q&A. That's amazing, you guys. So got a lot of your questions answered, hopefully. It's just, we are looking forward to meeting you. We're looking forward to reviewing your applications. We're excited about having a group of people that are like really excited about becoming neurologists and looking forward to it. And the process, I think, for us is one that, I want you to not, sort of be nervous about this. If we can sort of relieve your anxiety a little bit about it, then that's really what, I think a lot of us want to do. We want to meet you. This is a great opportunity for you as applicants, when you're doing your interviews, to meet a bunch of different programs. Obviously, you're only going to be attending one program, but it gives you a chance to meet a lot of your future colleagues, like other residents, maybe in your program, maybe in another one, to meet faculty, to meet program directors and potentially chairs at a lot of different programs. And I think it's a really sort of exciting opportunity to sort of network and get to know a lot of these folks that you may or may not end up training with, but and just kind of enjoy the process. So we are looking forward to meeting you and hearing more about you, and trying to figure out sort of who's going to be the best fit for our programs, the same way that you're trying to find out where you feel like you'd be happy training. And so the good news is that our neurology programs around the country are excellent. So, wherever you match, like, these are really, really strong training programs, just kind of across the board. And so it really is a question of figuring out which one is the best fit for you, because you are going to get really high quality training pretty much wherever you match. So I just want to, encourage you going into that, wish you all the best of luck. Thank you again to our panelists and to our AAN staff for supporting having this event. And for helping us distribute this consensus statement. So I encourage you all to make sure to save that, share it with your colleagues and friends who are looking for information about recommendations for how to apply. And good luck in the upcoming season.